They laughed at you, didn't they? Their voices still echo in your mind, ringing like a cruel melody that refuses to fade. They didn't just laugh, they reveled in your pain. Every stumble, every failure, every mistake, you were their favorite joke, the punchline to a story they thought would never change. They pointed, whispered, smirked behind your back. Some did it openly, bold in their mockery, while others hid their scorn behind false smile. But you felt it. You felt every dagger of ridicule piercing your skin, every sneer tightening around your throat like a noose. They watched you struggle, and instead of lending a hand, they chose to laugh. Instead of lifting you up, they pushed you down further, just to see if you would break. And maybe, for a moment, you did. Maybe for a moment, you felt like nothing more than the weak, worthless failure they believed you to be. You tried to act like it didn't matter, like their words didn't cut you open. But deep down, you knew. You felt the weight of their judgment pressing down on your chest like a heavy stone, crushing your spirit, making it harder to breathe. You remember the way they gathered like vultures, circling you as if you were already defeated, already done for. You stood in the battlefield of life, battered, bruised, bleeding from wounds they couldn't see, and yet they cheered against you, celebrated your downfall as if your pain was their pride. You saw it in their eyes, the amusement, the arrogance. They were certain you wouldn't rise, certain that this was the end of you. And the worst part, you started to believe them. You started to wonder if maybe they were right, if maybe you were destined to be nothing more than a cautionary tale, a lesson in failure. Their voices became the ones in your head. You're not good enough. You'll never make it. You should just give up. The words carved themselves into your bones, became the weight you carried with you every single day. This is what it feels like to be the underdog, to be the one they laugh at, the one they dismiss, the one they expect to fail. It's a lonely, suffocating place. The world feels like an unforgiving battlefield, and you stand alone, unarmed, exposed, with nothing but your own will to survive. But even that, your will, has started to waver, hasn't it? Because when they tell you you're nothing for long enough, it's hard not to wonder if they might be right. But here's what they don't know. Here's what they never saw coming. The underdog is dangerous, not because they start strong, but because they learn how to fight when they have nothing left to lose. And you are still standing, bruised, yes, beaten down, maybe, but not broken, not yet. The nights were the worst, weren't they? When the world went quiet, when the noise of their laughter faded into silence and you were left alone with nothing but your own thought. That's when it hit the hardest. When there was no one to perform for, no one to pretend for, just you and the weight of it all. You lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling the crushing weight of rejection, the unbearable suffocation of being unseen, unheard, unvalued. You were the joke, the easy target, the one they dismissed without a second thought. It didn't matter how hard you tried, how much effort you put in. Your name was never in the conversations that mattered. Your victories, small as they were, went unnoticed. Your failures, they echoed. They clung to you like a shadow, always present, always reminding you that in their eyes, you would never be more than a walking mistake. And the betrayal, they came from every direction, didn't they? The ones who once stood by you, the ones who once promised loyalty, they vanished the moment you needed them most. They turned their backs, joined in the whispers, laughed along with the rest. Some even pushed you down themselves, making sure you stayed beneath them. It wasn't enough that you were struggling. They wanted to make sure you stayed there. You watched them rise while you remained stuck in place. You saw them succeed, saw them celebrate, saw them step into the light while you stayed in the shadows, drowning in your own silence. And oh, how it burned, how it twisted in your chest, watching them win while you fought just to survive. You wanted to scream, to demand an answer. Why them? Why not me? But the world never answered. The world didn't care. You felt like you were sinking, Like the more you fought, the deeper you were pulled under, drowning, not in water, but in rejection, in failure, in the unbearable weight of being invisible. You gasped for air, for relief, but there was none. You tried to claw your way back to the surface, but every time you did, something pulled you back down. Your own doubts, their word, the reality of a world that had already decided you didn't matter. And so, you stopped fighting. Maybe not all at once, but little by little. The struggle became exhausting. The idea of sinking didn't seem so bad anymore. Maybe it would be easier to let go, to accept your place beneath them, to stop trying to prove yourself to people who had already made up their mind. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was all you'd ever be. But even as the thought whispered through your mind, something inside you refused to die. A tiny, stubborn ember buried beneath all the pain, all the rejection, small, weak, but still burning. There was a moment, a single defining moment, when you almost let go, when the weight of it all became too much, when the exhaustion seeped into your bones so deeply that even the thought of trying again felt unbearable. You had fought, clawed, struggled against the tide for so long, only to be dragged back under time and time again. And so you wondered, what's the point? The voice of doubt, the one that had been planted in you by their laughter, their words, their dismissals, grew louder than ever. Maybe they were right. Maybe you really were wasting your time. Maybe you really were destined to stay at the bottom while they soared above you. Maybe you weren't strong enough, smart enough, good enough. Every failure, every rejection, every moment of humiliation came rushing back all at once, wrapping around you like chain, holding you down. You told yourself you could endure it, that you had before. But this time, something felt different. This time, the weight of it crushed something inside you. This time, the exhaustion wasn't just in your body, it was in your spirit. What if I just stop? The thought crept in so subtly, so quietly, that at first you barely noticed it, but once it took root, it was all you could hear. What if I stopped trying? What if I accept it? Maybe it would be easier. Maybe it would hurt less if you just learned to live with it. If you stopped fighting battles you were never meant to win. You imagined letting go, stepping back, fading into the background where no one could laugh at you anymore. It wouldn't be happiness, but at least it wouldn't be pain. But then something happened. A thought, a whisper, a spark. What if they're wrong? The question came from nowhere, small and almost too weak to hold on to. But it was enough. It was enough to make you pause, to make you take a single shaky breath. Because if they were wrong, if even a fraction of what they said about you wasn't true, then what? And just like that, something inside you stirred. Something small, something fragile, but something real. A flicker of defiance, a quiet refusal to fully accept what they had tried to force upon you. It wasn't a battle cry. It wasn't a grand, heroic moment. It was just a whisper inside you, a whisper that said, no, not yet. And in that moment, you realized something. You're still here, and as long as you're here, the story isn't over. You stood at a crossroads, staring down two paths. One was familiar, the path of least resistance, the road where you stayed down, where you accepted what they said about you, where you let their laughter define you. It was an easy road, quiet, predictable. No more fighting, no more struggling, just surrender. But then there was the other path, the one no one expected you to take, the one filled with uncertainty, with hardship, with pain, but also with possibility. It wasn't open for you. No doors had ever been held wide to welcome you in. No one had paved the way for you to walk it. If you wanted it, you would have to carve it out yourself, step by step, brick by brick, through blood and sweat and a fire they never thought you could survive. And so a choice had to be made. Would you remain in their shadow, or would you break free? Would you live under the weight of their judgment, or would you rise above it? No one was going to save you. No one was going to hand you the life you wanted. You were never given a chance, but now you take it for yourself. The anger boiled inside you, not just at them, but at yourself, at all the time you had wasted believing them, at every second you had spent letting their voices shape your future. That anger, that frustration, it was fuel. And for the first time, you stopped trying to bury it. You embraced it. You let it burn, let it ignite something inside you that had been sleeping for too long. Something changed in you that day. You weren't the same person anymore. The person they laughed at was gone. What rose in their place was something different, stronger, sharper, resilient. The transformation had begun, and this time there was no turning back. The first steps were quiet. No grand announcements, no dramatic proclamations. Just a shift, small but deliberate. A tightening of your jaw, a fire in your eyes, a silent promise made in the depths of your soul. I will not be who they think I am. I will not stay down. Transformation isn't instant. It isn't handed to you in a moment of revelation. It is forged. Like steel in the fire, you had to endure the heat, withstand the hammer, survive the breaking, before becoming something unshakable. Every strike, every burn, every moment of agony, it was necessary. Because without the fire, there is no strength. Without the pressure, there is no resilience. The work began in the shadows, where no one could see. The discipline, the relentless effort, the hours spent in isolation, grinding while they slept, pushing while they wasted time. There were no shortcuts, no easy roads, only the brutal process of self-reconstruction. It was exhausting, it was painful, and yet for the first time, you didn't resist the pain. You embraced it. The struggle that once felt unbearable became something else entirely. It became fuel. You learned to love it, to crave it, because every moment of suffering, every ounce of discomfort, was proof that you were changed. Proof that you were leaving behind the weak, broken version of yourself and becoming something unstoppable. You weren't just surviving anymore. You were becoming. You were rising. You were the fire. And the world. It had no idea what was coming. No one saw it coming. Not them. Not the ones who laughed, who doubted, who counted you out before the battle had even begun. While they were busy mocking you, you were busy working. While they wasted their breath on insults, you were sharpening your mind, your body, your will. There was no fanfare, no sudden revelation, just quiet, relentless progress, day after day, step after step. The world doesn't reward the impatient. True power comes from consistency, from discipline, from the kind of effort that doesn't demand recognition. You learned the art of patience, the silent game of outlasting those who only knew how to sprint. You weren't after quick victory. You were building something unshakable, something permanent. And with every rep, every lesson, every sacrifice, you felt it. Your rise was inevitable. Like a storm gathering strength over the horizon, you grew in silence. They didn't see it yet. They were too busy underestimating you. But the air was changing. The energy was shifting. Their laughter became less certain. Their voices tinged with something new, unease. They couldn't put their finger on it, but something was different. Something was coming. And deep down, they started to realize what they had never considered before. You weren't the same person anymore. You weren't beneath them anymore. And soon, they would see exactly what that meant. Then it happened. The first crack in their certainty. The first shockwave that shattered their illusion of who you were. It wasn't a grand triumph. Not yet. Just a small victory. A single undeniable moment where you proved, if only for a second, that you were not who they thought you were. It could have been anything. A win they never expected. A skill they never thought you could master. A moment where you stood taller than before. But whatever it was, it caught their attention. It made them pause. They'd spent so long laughing at you, dismissing you, writing you off. And yet for the first time, something didn't add up. They watched, eyes narrowing, voices lowering to hushed whispers. Wait, you're not supposed to succeed. Doubt slithered into their mind. Not full-blown fear, not yet, but curiosity laced with something else, something they wouldn't admit. Because if you could do this thing they never expected, then what else were you capable of? They told themselves it was luck, a fluke, a one-time occurrence. But deep down, something inside them shifted. Because for the first time, they had to face a reality they were never prepared for. They might have been wrong about you. And that thought, it unsettled them more than they'd ever admit. The game had changed. You were no longer the one struggling to keep up, no longer clawing just to survive. Now you moved with purpose, with dominance. The battlefield that once buried you beneath its weight was now yours to command. Every step you took sent a ripple through the world they thought they controlled. You were no longer the prey, you were the predator. They had spent so long underestimating you, laughing at you, treating you as if you were nothing. But now they scrambled to make sense of what was happening. How? How did you rise from the ashes? How did the one they mocked become the one they couldn't ignore? They searched for explanations, desperate to believe this wasn't real. But reality had changed. The tide had turned, and now they weren't laughing. They were watching, they were whispering, and deep in the pit of their stomachs, where fear and regret fester, they began to understand. You weren't just proving them wrong, you were surpassing them. And the worst part? There was nothing they could do to stop it. And then the moment arrived, the reckoning. You returned, not as the person they once ridiculed, not as the one they dismissed, but as something they never saw coming. Stronger, sharper, unbreakable. This time, there was no need for words. Your presence alone was enough. They could see it in your stance, in the fire in your eyes, in the way you carried yourself like someone who had been through hell and come back forged in its flames. They tried to deny it, to pretend they weren't shaken, but their silence betrayed them. Their laughter gone, their confidence shattered. They looked at you now with something new, something foreign. Was it respect, fear, regret? Maybe all three. It didn't matter, because you weren't here for their approval. You never were. You faced them, the ones who once mocked you, and you stood tall. The ruins they tried to bury you in, you had built something greater from them, a foundation, a throne, and now they understood the truth they had ignored for so long. You didn't just survive, you conquered, and they were nothing more than spectators to the rise they swore would never happen. They laughed, they mocked, they swore you would never make it. But now they bow, not because you asked them to, not because you needed their validation, but because they have no choice, because reality has made it clear what they once thought was a joke, a failure, a lost cause, has become unstoppable. But here's the truth they never understood. This was never about them. It was never about silencing their laughter, never about proving them wrong. It was about proving yourself right. About realizing that the power was always within you, waiting to be awakened. About seeing the fire that had been buried beneath their doubt and letting it consume every limitation they placed upon you. The underdog? Gone. The warrior? Here to stay. You don't need their approval. You don't need their recognition, because you were never defined by their opinions in the first place. You were always powerful. They just couldn't see it. But now they have no choice.